The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Thursday, another beautiful day in Puerto Rico. I hope you all are having a fantastic week. It's going okay, good here, everything's good here. All right, so today we're taking on the super controversial question of what is a woman. Kidding aside, the controversial, as we'll see, I don't think what is a woman is controversial, although I guess it is out there in the culture. But the whole issue of trans, the whole issue of the trans wanting to impose particular definitions on us, on the rest of us, on the rest of the culture. We'll talk about all of that. I've got a video from a documentary called What is a Woman of a professor. I'm less interested there in the content of what he says, but how he says it. I think it demonstrates a certain epistemology, a certain approach to thinking, or non-thinking, a certain approach to concepts, a certain approach to his field of study that I think is worthwhile observing. So we'll be talking about all that. I do want to emphasize, because I know there's at least one trans person on here, this is not about. I'm not gonna talk about being trans, or I think the more interesting issue is the definitional issue, the epistemological issue, and then the cultural issue, the kind of cultural imposition. Anyway, we're going to talk about that. Wow, that doodle bunny, that was quick. Thank you for the $100. And all right, we've got a song to review. Cool. All right, let's see. That's going to be the topic today, so we should have plenty of time for questions. Feel free to jump in with questions, and questions about anything on the topic, not on the topic, although, of course, my preference is for the topic, and my preference is for questions that are, $20 or more. They get preferential treatment on the Yaron Brook Show. Let's see, what else did I want to say before we get started? Yeah, literally just was on. It ended at 8 p.m. on the dot, and I switched over to this. I was just on a kind of a conversation with Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if you guys know Jonathan Haidt, but he's kind of a center-left intellectual who writes a lot about politics, about, I don't know if he's a sociologist, I don't know how you categorize it, but he runs, I think, the Heterodoxy Academy, very big on free speech, a real free speech advocate, very good on free speech on campuses. But he had a pretty influential article in The Atlantic about the role of social media in the fragmentation of American society, and how social media has really affected this fragmentation, and to a large extent caused it. So he gives it real causal efficacy, particularly the share button, the retweet button, the threaded comment possibilities, and all of that, and has some proposals how to regulate, unfortunately, how to regulate social media. But so the article was interesting, even though I disagree with much of it, and the conversation we just had was interesting, and a lot of interesting issues came up, and that's going to be a topic in the next few days, because I think it's a fascinating topic. And he brings in the metaphor of the metaphor of the Tower of Babel. So we're gonna talk about maybe Saturday or Sunday social media and the fragmentation or the disintegration of American society. To what extent social media is responsible? To what extent ideas are responsible? What ideas are doing this? And to what extent elites and institutions and all the things that are currently kind of out there. The conversation that we just had with him. It was a small group, like 40 people on a Zoom call with John and Haidt, I thought was really fascinating. He's smart, although I don't think he, again, I disagree with a lot of what he says, but he is smart. I didn't have an interview, I didn't talk to him one-on-one, but I was part of a 40-person seminar with him that lasted an hour. Too short, but lasted about an hour, which was really good. So I'm part of this confidence group that has really big influential people as part of it, and they do a lot of these kind of online things, and offline, that is, and in person. So it's a lot of fun. So that'll definitely be a topic of conversation, a topic of a show coming up really soon. Something like the Tower of Babel, social media and the disintegration of American society. Something like that sounds like a pretty good title for a show. All right, so let's get to today's show. Today we're talking about what is a woman. The topic's obviously big in the culture. It's not a topic that I have to say I have been or am super interested in. It's, I'm saying this all up front. This is not an area of expertise for me. It's not an area of expertise for me in terms of thinking much about gender or thinking much about what's involved, although because I'm doing a show, I've obviously given quite a bit of thought and done quite a bit of reading in order to prepare for the show. But in the past, it has not been. But it is a big issue out there in the culture, and therefore I need the headphones because we're going to run the video in a little bit. So let me take them off now and put them back on when we get there. So it's something I've done some reading about, and some watching some videos and some thinking about. It's come up in several of my shows in the past, so we have talked about it on the show in the past. There is a documentary right now by Matt Walsh called What is a Woman? And I'm going to use a segment of this that somebody sent me that wanted me to comment on that I'm going to do. But I do want to make a disclaimer about Matt. I'm not a fan of Matt Walsh's. I mean, he's super religious and I think frames a lot of the issues from the perspective of religion. I'm not a fan necessarily of the documentary. I haven't watched the whole thing. And my primary reason for showing the documentary is showing the guy he's interviewing and the way the guy he's interviewing is responding. I find that interesting, but not so much the content Matt brings to the show. So I'm not a fan of Matt, and I'm not a fan of the whole approach to this issue from a religious perspective. I mean, I find it kind of funny that religion. Religion really has a good, needs to really think about what is a woman for a long time, for hundreds and hundreds of years. Religion has got that answer pretty wrong. And from a fundamental perspective, from a rights perspective, from a attitude perspective, it's still true that fundamentalist religionists, whether they are Muslim, Jewish, or Christians, treat women pretty badly. So I hate being lectured about issues related to sexuality by religionists who don't get sex at all, and who are pretty bad about the whole topic. So what is the issue? The whole phenomena of transgenderism, is there such a thing? Transgender people has come to the forefront in part of the cultural debate over the last 10 years or so. I'd say particularly primarily in the last 5 or 6 years. As transgender people have come out, in a sense, come out of the closet and demanded to be treated as equals. My general political approach to this is that I have no problem from a political perspective with people who are transgender. I find it abhorrent that people would be violent against them, would treat them with disdain or horror. I find the whole phenomena of people who want to outlaw them, who want to ridicule them, who want to punish them, who want to, just horrific. Just as much as I thought that, the horrors of punishing homosexuality and imprisoning homosexuals. But there seems to be there certainly is a segment of the population that finds this so disturbing that they lash out with violence. And that is obviously wrong and unacceptable. The fact that somebody else is transgender is not a violation of your rights. It's not an attack on you. It's not violence against you, and therefore does not give you any right to inflict violence on them. But there is a flip side to that, and that is that the transgender community, at least, and again, you never know how big this is, the vocal parts of it, the intellectual parts of it, the philosophical parts of it, those who are its intellectual leaders, have demanded more than just, in a sense, to be left alone, respect, equality before the law. They have demanded much more than that. They have demanded that we all rethink what gender is, that we all change the way with which we approach gender, and it proposed a completely new theory of what gender is. They call it gender identity theory, and how you should understand your own gender, and they demand that this become, accepted in society, and this become the basis on which we teach our kids, for example. And this is where I think this is most right now creating the most conflict is around children. That this new theory of gender now become mainstream, become part of our educational system, and actually be taught to little children. They demand that their view of gender should dominate. And, I think the views of gender, we'll get to that, are wrong and not reality-based and potentially harmful, particularly to children. So it's there where the conflict is today, is the attempt of the transgender intellectuals, the transgender activists, to impose their will on the rest of us. And in a sense, to eradicate sexual differences in areas where it is not appropriate to eradicate differences between the sexes. Think of the controversies around sports, in addition to controversies around education. So around sports, the idea that, you should be able to compete in the sport of the sex, gender with which you identify, even though you're not that sex or gender, even if you identify with it. We'll get to the difference between those two. And that has created real conflict. And what I find most interesting, and to me, this is the real quandary that we all face, the real challenge that we face is, to me, much of this is pretty ridiculous and pretty, self-evident. I find, okay, so there's this minority of trans intellectuals pushing a particular agenda about how to think about trans and how to think about, identity, gender identity, and how to think about sex and all of this stuff. And that's okay. But why are so many people folding? Why are they having so much success? Why is it that this has not generated a lot more resistance from the mainstream, but from, people in a variety of different areas, whether it's sports, whether it's, it's starting to, but it's often starting to bring about opposition from the wrong people, right, in the wrong attitude, like from religion, rather than from just, I don't know, common sense kind of people who say, well, wait a minute, it's wrong that this person compete in women's swimming, or it's wrong that these people should share a bathroom, particularly when they're kids, right? That somebody who just says they're a woman but still has a penis should be able to go into a woman's bathroom. There's just some common sense there, and it seems like so many people are just folded. What to me is most interesting about this, and I don't know how much we'll cover today, is the idea that our culture is so weak that any kind of new, somewhat crazy, I think, theory about these things, about almost anything, is just because it comes, I don't know, from a group that is objectively discriminated against, because it comes from a group that is objectively, oppressed, that somehow that gives it legitimacy, validity, and we all must just succumb, and we all do, right? Why do people allow themselves to be canceled? Why do institutions allow it to be canceled? Of course, part of the transgenders come to the forefront because of people being canceled, and attempts to cancel J.K. Rowling is maybe one of the most visible examples of this. But there was also a feminist in England, philosophy professor, who taught, I think at Sussex University, and was forced to leave her position because she objected to some of these points, some of these ideas that the trans, I don't know what to call them, trans intellectuals, trans movement leaders proposed, and they forced her to resign. They forced her to leave, and it's a tragedy because she was, seemingly a pretty good philosophy professor. All right. So what is that they are pushing? What is it that they are driving at? Well, they want, what is being proposed is that we redefine the concept of woman. The woman is not an adult human female, with female referring to biology, ovaries, a vagina, no Y chromosome, and all of that. The idea is that we reject that is separate from what people actually are. That being a woman or a man has nothing to do with our biology, that it has to do with something else. And of course, what that something else, and defining what it means to be a woman and what a woman is, and what does it mean to feel like a woman? How does that feel differently than feeling like a man? There's something there, because there is a psychological difference between men and female. But what does that exactly mean? They kind of brush aside, partially because for years and years and years, many of the feminist movement on the left have been arguing that there are zero differences between men and women, that men and women are basically exactly the same, and that that it's just a social contract, that there is no feminine and masculine, there is no male and female. There are physiological differences, but they don't manifest itself in ability or in psychology or in anything else, which I think, again, is wrong. But they've been arguing that, and now they have to say, no, some people feel like a woman and feel like a man. So does that mean there are differences? What does it mean to feel like a woman when you're young? Does that mean you're a man, but you want to play with dolls? What does it exactly mean? Does that mean being female means playing with dolls? See, this is where it gets tricky and I think and can be problematic. So the traditional definition of a woman, if you open up a dictionary, the traditional definition, adult human female, no Y chromosome, and all the other biological features that are involved in being a female. And that's what a woman is, an adult of that species. But they want to, again, reject that. What they have this term about identified or, as male or female at birth. So, it's not like you are, it's just somebody labeled you that. That's why you think you're a man, but really it's just somebody labeled you that when you were born. It has nothing to do with the fact that you were born with a penis. That has nothing to do with it. And part of the argument they make is that there are these, borderline cases. There are people who are born with a Y chromosome but don't develop a penis. There are people, there's all kinds of, biological errors, right, that appear, mutations that appear that don't designate man or woman, don't designate male or female. There are all kinds of borderline cases in life, in reality, all over the place. That's just one of them, and that doesn't negate the concept. So let me just, let's talk a little bit about the concept of woman. And I want to give credit here to my colleagues at the Ayn Rand Institute, Ankar Gate and Ben Baer, who did, I think, an excellent episode on this question of gender identity. I learned a lot from it, and a lot of what I've got to say today is kind of based on what they said. I'm not suggesting that they agree with anything that I say, or that I'm here to represent them, but I learned a lot from them, and a lot of what I'm going to say today is based on stuff I learned from them. So I'll give that credit. And I wish I had the, I'm gonna find the philosopher's name, because I think they learned a lot about this from this philosopher. I'll get you that in a minute. I didn't have that prepared. I apologize. But one second. Let's see. This, I'll tell you exactly the video that I think, if you're interested in this topic, this is the video you should watch. It's Kathleen Stock, which is the philosopher who was at the University of Sussex, who was forced to resign. She wrote a book called Material Girls, which Ben Baer, Dan Schwartz, and Ankar Gate read and recommend. And they have a lot of very positive things to say about the book. Not that they agree with everything in the book, but they really thought, she had some insightful things to say. Anyway, the philosopher is Kathleen Stock, S-T-O-C-K. So that is issue. All right. So the concept of woman. Why do we need a concept of woman? Well, why do we need any concept? It's to identify something in reality that now we don't identify everything we observe in reality with a concept, but it's to integrate something that is useful, that is important for human survival, for human thought, for human cognition. Why do we need the concept of woman? Well, because there are differences between men and women. If women and men were exactly the same, well, we wouldn't have two concepts for them. We have two concepts because of the fact that they are different. They are different biologically. One could argue there are also differences psychologically, and these differences are important. And we need to have concepts for these differences because we need to be able to think about women in a different way than we think about men. We need to explain certain things that are important in the world by reference to woman as a biological entity versus and man as a biological entity. Maybe the most important of these, a most significant of these, is reproduction. You can't think about reproduction. You can't, for human beings, Reproduction is meaningless, at least until we get complete test tube babies. And even then, you'll have to get an egg from a woman and sperm from a man. So maybe one day when we create, artificial sperm and eggs, then maybe, or when we start cloning people, then maybe we can get rid of the concept of man and woman with regard to reproduction. But evolution necessitates that we have the concept of man and woman. They serve an important function in reproduction. You can't reproduce without, and you can't understand reproduction without understanding the differences between them and the different roles that they play in bringing about offspring. You need the concept of woman with regard to medicine. Women and men, because they have a different biology, they have different hormones, they have different organs, are going to be treated differently. They respond differently to medication, respond differently to, they're susceptible to different cancers. They have different abilities to, all kinds of medical issues arise that are different. And again, this should be self-evident. We need concepts to differentiate between this group, which is, yeah, it's all about the different individuals, but as a group has certain characteristics that are different than this other group, and that these characteristics are important. They're important to reproduction, they're important to health, they're important to a bunch of different things, that it's important for us to recognize what's similar about all these, all women, and what differentiates them from all these, all men. That is important cognition. So it's thinking about reproduction, it's medical, but it's also thinking about sex. And this is true whether you're heterosexual or homosexual. If I'm attracted to women, then I need to know what women are. And the fact is, I'm attracted to women, but I'm not attracted to women, to people with penises who call themselves women. It's something different. It's not in the same category. It's something completely different. So who I want to have sex with, what meaning that sex takes, is going to be very different. And therefore, I need cognition, I need guidance, I need to know. If I like women, who do I choose? How do I distinguish between women and non-women? You need a concept. And of course, we've seen with sports, if we're going to have men's sports and women's sports, if we're going to have men's sports and women's sports, then we need to be able to say who's a man and who's a woman. If we're going to have no differentiation, just sports, then fine. There is a value, I think, to having women's sports in addition to men's sports. But then if we have women's sport, then we have to be able to define who's a woman and be able to define who's a man so we can segregate those two groups up. And we have to have a pretty clear definition. And I think those definitions need to be based on some objective sense. For example, in sports, the reason we have sports for women and sports for men is because men and women develop differently. They develop different muscles. They develop, different levels of strength, different levels of agility, different levels of speed. They just are not the same. Most of that development happens through puberty. And the strongest woman, the strongest man, there's a difference. The man is stronger. So if you take somebody who's gone through puberty as a man but now is identified as a woman and put them in a female sport, that can't work. That can't be right. That can't be fair to the woman involved. So at least in sports, medicine, sex, and reproduction, sex and reproduction being related to one another. But not necessarily, right? Because you could be a homosexual or you could just be out for casual sex without the idea of you want to know who you're going to have sex with. Most of us want to know, at least, who we're going to have sex with. So there is an important reason to have an actual definition of concept. Concepts are important. Concepts are the way we think. And we need to have them clear, otherwise our thinking is muddled. And it's not just for the purpose of thinking, it's for the purpose of action. And we can't act unless we have our concepts clear. All right. Let's see. What happened here? Jacob, thank you for the support. We got a lot of Super Chat questions pretty quickly here, so I don't know if they're on this topic or not. I haven't been able to scan them. Doesn't look like it, so it looks like questions from all over the place. All over the place. Some on femininity, masculinity, that's interesting. Yeah, this is a question relevant to what I just said. Low Legend says, in 99% of cases, we don't categorize people based on their genitals, but on their outward appearance. A woman is someone who fits the social role appearance of a woman, which can differ culturally. Absolutely. But ultimately, it's important that we know, at least for certain functions, for certain reasons, whether they're a man or a woman. For example, if I want to have sex with them, then I want to know if they're a man or a woman. That changes whether I'm attracted to them or not. Their genitalia actually matters. If you go into the hospital, your genitalia or your biology, your DNA, and what chromosomes you have matters. And if we think about reproduction, it matters. And I think it matters in sports. So yes, well, you know, and this is the point, right? That if somebody is trans and they look like a woman and they act like a woman and they want to be treated like a woman, fine, until it gets to sex, reproduction, medicine, sports, and maybe a few others that I can't think of. But, you know, I think I've told you on previous shows that I know that Deirdre McCluskey, I think you know Deirdre McCluskey, the economist, used to be Donald McCluskey, became a famous economist as Donna McCluskey, and, you know, he transitioned to being a woman relatively, I think, late in life, after, I think she already had children, he already had children. It was very costly for her. The children stopped speaking to her. The wife and the kids and became alienated from them. So it was very, very difficult. But Deirdre, you know, I enjoy her company. I call her a her. I have no problem with that person. But is Deirdre McCluskey a woman? No. She's a trans. She's a trans woman. But because for important purposes, for important categories of human interaction, it's important to identify that she's not a woman. You know, you can't just say she's a woman. She's a trans woman. And I don't know what kind of surgery she's had. I don't know what kind of transition she's had. But as a human being, it's pleasant to be with her. She's super smart. She's off the chart smart. She's incredibly knowledgeable. She's written amazing books. I treat her as an individual, and based on her achievement and based on her character, at least that part of the character that I am familiar with. And, you know, I'm saddened. I mean, my response to trans is, it saddens me that people are so conflicted between I don't know, some kind of sense of what they are, gender-wise, and their biology. They're so conflicted that they're willing to go through massive surgeries and dramatic changes in their lives and all the upheaval that is horrible. That is horrible and terrible, and I feel sorry for them. It doesn't change the fact that she's not a woman, even though I will treat her as such in our social interaction. Now, the theory that they base the idea that, we should scrap the concept of woman in terms of sex is based on the idea that, and this is something that I think that I learned from Anka and Ben's discussion. So they have these 4 principles, and again, it's not that they hold these 4 principles. These are 4 principles that are identified by the philosopher we just discussed as the principles that kind of guide this whole movement and the intellectuals within the movement. That all of us have an inner state called gender identity. We have some sense in which we are female or male. And that, there's something there, I think. That is, there is something there. This has to do with femininity, masculinity, I think. And then they say for some, this does not match the biological sex originally assigned to them, right? Not that they were born with, right? So this was assigned to them, which makes them trans. Trans is this idea that they have a gender identity that does not match their biology. But they go on and say, okay, well, the gender identity, not the biological sex, is what makes you a man and a woman. So biology is irrelevant, which is weird. It's just a negation of reality, complete negation of reality. And the existence of trans creates a moral obligation for us to protect gender identity, not biological sex. So anything that has to do with legal stuff. And of course, I just mentioned sports and medicine and sex and so on. But there's a lot of legal issues, particularly given our screwed up legal system, that have to do with discrimination against women or have to do with particular things that relate to men and women. And now the law has to pretend that men and women don't have a particular biology and erase that biology. And all of that is perverse. And it really seems to be driven by a real subjectivist view of reality, and of concepts, a use of something that's pretty ambiguous, gender, right? What is, and then gender identity, again, what is that? Again, again, we could get into the femininity, masculinity. Are you born with a gender identity? Is it something that happens to you after you're born? Is it something you choose? Hard to tell. They don't feel at home in their own bodies. Okay. So this is kind of what they're pushing. They're pushing this epistemological subjectivism. And I thought I'd show you this clip, this video. This is from Matt Walsh's documentary. Now, again, let me say again, because I know some of you joined late, I'm not a fan of Matt Walsh. I'm not a fan of this documentary. I'm not a fan of his work on this kind of issues, primarily because I don't think you can really do issues like this justice from a religious perspective. Matt is very religious. We disagree on a lot of things, among others, his dislike of Ayn Rand and of Atlas Shrugged. So there's a lot of stuff I don't like. My showing this video is by no means an endorsement of Matt Walsh or the documentary. I want us to focus on this professor. He's a college professor who's answering these questions about what is a woman, which is the name of the documentary, and he's answering these questions, and we're going to try and we're going to comment on it. So focus on that. There we go. All right. Hopefully you can all see that. Let me unmute the video you're about to listen to, and here we go.
We're talking about gender and sex, and there's a lot of controversies there.
And also, I don't know what preceded this. So the professor has a particular attitude, and part of the attitude might be because of what has happened before this particular exchange happens. So we're going to judge him, but I want to judge him in the, I want to make sure that this is the appropriate context. I don't know that. Again, I don't trust the filmmaker here necessarily to give us the full context. I think there's enough here to be able to see kind of the way he's thinking about these things. But I want to recognize, in fairness to him, that there might have been a half an hour discussion before this that set the tone for what he's about to say.
If we're talking about a trans woman has all of the male physical characteristics, so would that not be a male then? Couldn't we plainly say this person is a male?
Well, I guess it's like, why are you asking the question? I think I want to understand sort of why that's so important. So if someone tells
Just
you...
to sort of understand reality,
Well, I mean, I think when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. So if a person says that they're a woman or they're a man, then that's them telling you their gender is. I'm not so sure what social interactions would have to do with maleness or femaleness that would be.
Well, I mean, I could think of a few. One, I want to have sex with you or not. I'm treating you as your doctor. Those are two social interactions where it would be relevant what the genitalia that the person has are. At least for most of us, I think they are relevant. But notice how he's trying to completely evade and ignore the biological aspects. It's as if biology doesn't matter. They're telling you they're a female. That's enough. Most people don't lie. What's enough is what they tell you. What's enough is what they feel. What's enough is what they emote. Facts, reality, biology. Seems, at least here, to this guy, completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
I'm not even talking about social context. I'm just trying to start by getting to the truth,
Yeah, I mean, I'm really uncomfortable with that language of like getting to the truth. Again, in social life.
Why is that uncomfortable?
He's uncomfortable with getting to the truth. Now, again, I don't know what happened before. If he got the sense that Matt is trying to push him. I mean, hopefully he did some research on Matt before he did the interview, but it doesn't look like he did any, given the interaction. But truth, facts, reality, biology don't seem to interest him.
Comfortable.
Because it sounds actually deeply transphobic to me.
Transphobic. I mean, notice, what does phobia mean? What does phobia mean? Right? Phobia means afraid of. So is somebody asking for the truth mean that they're afraid of homosexuals? Whenever you accuse somebody of a phobia, you're telling them that they're afraid of the thing that you're saying they're afraid of. Homophobia, they're afraid of homosexuals. Are they? I mean, there might be a lot of people who unjustly, demean homosexuals, unjustly treat homosexuality. But does that make them afraid of it? The whole lashing out with phobias, transphobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, all these things, as if there's nothing to talk about on these issues. There's nothing to discuss. It's immediately, well, you're a bad person because you're expressing this fear, which is a weird. The whole thing is a weird way of analyzing the problem. But I'm not sure this professor would say if somebody else, if they were talking about a different topic and somebody said, I want to get to the truth of this, he'd say, oh, well, truth is homophobic. It's the context. And again, I don't know what the context was before we started showing this view, but it is kind of, this is spooky. This is spooky stuff when the response to, I'm just trying to get to the truth about gender, about what gender means, is, well, you're a homophobe. doesn't seem very intellectual, does it? I mean, this guy is a...
And if you keep probing, we're going to stop the interview.
If I probe about what the truth is?
You keep invoking the word truth, which is condescending and rude.
How is truth condescending and rude? How is asking somebody what they think the truth is about something condescending and rude? It's a complete rejection of reality. It's a rejection of the idea of fact. It's a rejection of reason. It's, at the end of the day, what matters are the emotions of people. What matters are how people feel. And that's what I think this whole trans movement is about. It's about the elevation of emotions above all things, and it's about the destruction of reason, fact, biology, truth, reality. And again, this is not to say every trans person is this way, not at all. You know, the fact that you're a trans person doesn't mean you need to buy into this particular philosophy. Certainly, for example, I don't think Deirdre does. But this is what the intellectuals behind it are pushing. This is what the movement is pushing. And it's a nihilistic movement because the goal is not the elevation of no sex. The goal is the destruction of sex, the destruction of male and female, the destruction of sex. It's the negation. And it's, you know, you see the nihilism in the open hostility to the truth, to the concept of truth, not to the truth.
I'm saying to you...
How is the word truth condescending and rude?
Why don't you tell me what your truth is? And you're walking on 30 seconds more of thin ice before I get up.
What my truth is? Well, I don't think I really have a truth. I think that there's just the truth, like the reality. And so we should begin by trying to figure out what the reality is.
Uh-huh. And why are you concerned with when someone else tells you that they're a man, or even if they use the word male, why are you concerned with not believing them?
Well, you keep bringing it back.
Well, this is why I think Matt is weak, right? He could say, well, I'm a doctor and I want to know, or I want to have sex, you know, I want to know if there's a possibility of sex here. I want to know what league in sports to put them in. There are a lot of reasons why you would want to know, and he could give some of those, right? And I'd be curious what the professor would have said in those circumstances.
So, you know, how do you respond in a social situation? But,
that's what I do. I'm a social scientist.
Well, right, but we're in a university. This is a place of understanding truth, isn't it? Or
absolutely, we pursue truth, and I'm a social scientist, and that's what I do.
But you just said the truth is transphobic.
That you would say, if you're saying the truth is that I get to say, you're not a man, show me your genitalia, that's transphobic.
No, I don't want to see anybody's genitalia. I just mean, someone can make a statement about themselves that could be untrue. Like, for example, if I were to say that I'm a black man, would you accept that, or would you be skeptical?
Are you black? Are you African American? Are you biracial?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, you don't look that, and I don't think it doesn't sound like that's a genuine statement of who you are.
Okay, so that's my point. I could make a statement about who I am that's incorrect.
Of course, I think it's well established that human beings can lie, yes.
Or not even lie. I mean, I could just be mistaken.
Yeah. I'm not sure where you're going.
I guess this all comes back, it all comes down to really one question. Especially women, gender and sexuality studies. So what is a woman?
Why do you ask that question?
I just really like to know.
What do you think the answer to that question is?
Well, I'm asking. That's why I came to a college professor who's.
Notice
this is
how
your.
he
This is what you
doesn't
do.
want to answer this question.
What other kinds of answers have you gotten?
a lot of like this where you're not answering, and I've gotten a lot of that. So
I think it's interesting that you say that some of the people you've interviewed have been reluctant to answer it, and I think that has a lot to do with the questions that preceded it and the way that you've conducted yourself in the interview.
how have I conducted myself?
How do you think you've conducted yourself?
Well, this is partially, I'm curious what happened before the interview that we've seen.
You just really don't want to answer the questions, do you?
I came today very willing and enthusiastic about answering questions about women's and gender sexuality studies, which is
So
the
you
work that I
wanted
do.
you wanted to answer questions about women's studies, and so shouldn't the first answer you should be able to provide is what exactly is a woman?
Well, for me, it's actually a really simple answer, and that's a person who identifies as a woman.
But what are they identifying as?
As a woman.
But what is that?
As a woman.
Do you know what a circular definition is?
I do.
It's sort of like what you're doing right now, where a woman is a woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, because you're seeking what we would call in my field of work an essentialist definition of gender. I think it sounds like you would like me to give you a set of biological or cultural characteristics that are associated with one gender or the other.
I'm not seeking any type of definition. I'm just seeking a definition.
Yeah, and I gave you one.
Yeah, I mean, a woman is somebody who identifies as a woman. That's a definition, right? That's what constitutes the definition. I mean, that's absurd, ridiculous, stupid. Now there are other views that are even worse in some sense. There's some really horrible people that he's interviewed, but that's a college professor. College professor. You know, and the problem with the various definitions that they provide, I've looked here at definitions that they've, you know, if you know, gender of gender identity and what it means, and what it means, how people define women, and it all falls down to this circular. It almost always becomes this circular definition, because one of the things they don't want to do. One of the things they clearly don't want to do is they don't want to provide a biological definition, because that's problematic for them. But then they also don't want to define a psychological. So I feel like a woman. Well, what is feeling like a woman? What is that like? Well, does it mean that you're submissive and I don't know, passive, and you like dresses, and you're, wait a minute, but now you're stereotyping women. You're associating all kind of psychological attributes to women that we don't like. Well, but then tell me, what does it feel to feel like a woman that is not that way? And I keep reading the stuff, and they won't actually say it. They won't actually say it. This is why, by the way, there's quite a bit of feminists who are anti this trans movement, because feminists have spent a lot of time trying to say women are not that different from men. You know, the better feminists don't say they're completely the same, but intellectually we're not different. In many ways, we're not different from men. We can do much of what men can do. And, you know, we've been focused on getting rid of all the stereotypes that are associated with being a woman. And now you're telling us, and we've been saying these differences are not significant. Now you're saying they are significant, they're huge, they're big, psychological, because they're not physiological, they're psychological. They're how you feel, like your identity as, which is your feeling. And this is the conflict, right? So, you know, then there's somebody on the chat, Lo said, you know, people base their evaluation of somebody as a woman or man based on their appearance. So Lo says here in the super chat, he says, a woman is a social category associated with but not essentially caused by having female anatomy. But it clearly is not. Because a woman is somebody with female anatomy. It's not a social category. I don't know what a social category even means. A woman is a concept. It's a word that stands for a particular category in reality. It's not a social creation. It's not a myth that is just subjectively associated with something. It is dependent on and has, real evolutionary importance because of reproduction. Women can have babies. Men cannot. That's huge. That's a big, big difference. And I think a big difference that manifests itself psychologically as well. But that's a big difference. That's not a social category. That's not a made-up thing. It's not an arbitrary thing. Now, woman is a social category associated with, but not essentially caused by having female genitalia. But that's not a definition, because even there, what is it? A social category of what? Of a way you dress and a way you behave and a way you emote. What is it? What is the thing that the category is associated with? Outward appearance? That's it? That's all that they care about? No, it can't be just outward appearance. Because, again, there's this idea of gender identity. I'm identifying with a particular gender. That's not associated with just my outward appearance. That's associated with something deep in my psyche. So even your definition, Lo, is not a definition, because it's leaving out the characteristic that make one, that define the social category. And you see, this is the thing. They don't want to define it. It scares them to define it. Because by defining, what are you doing when you define something? You delimit it. And modern epistemology refuses to do that. Lo says categories don't exist in the world. We define them based on utility. We define them based on utility, but based on actual existence, actual reality, actual features that exist in reality. And that's why they have utility. The reason they have utility is because they exist in reality. And utility means our ability to deal with reality. So again, the utility of sex, the utility of biological sex is reproduction, is sex. It's medical treatment. I have to have a category of women and men to be able to deal with those. I mean, there are many other reasons one has to have this category, but that's one. Lo goes on, trans women are women because women in a social category, not a biological one. No, but that's completely random and arbitrary. Who defines what social categories are? They are, I mean, when you put two things next to each other, and if they're the same in fundamental ways, then they belong in the same category for a particular purpose. Let's say the purpose is to identify different types of human beings. Well, all human beings, but different types of human beings. You put a man and a woman naked in front of you, they're different in fundamental, biologically fundamental ways. Fundamental biological ways that shape how they interact with reality, how they interact with other people. Trans women and cis women are different in fundamental, not in non-essential ways, but in fundamental ways that affect how people will interact with them, rationally interact with them for the utility, whether it's reproduction or whether it's just sex. But this whole idea of a social category, concepts are not social. They're not arbitrary. They're not whatever you feel like they should be. They relate to specific characteristics, specific facts in reality. And the relationship to those facts to, what you're trying to achieve. But, so, it's fascinating to me that people can think that trans women and cis women are in somehow the same category of woman. They're fundamentally different. And they're fundamentally different perceptually. So it's not hard. And the utility of it, it does not apply for everything. For some things, it doesn't matter. I don't care. And for some things, I do care. Right? For some things, I do care. For other things, I don't care. For their intellectual output, I don't care. Trans, cis, it doesn't matter. For sex, it very much matters. Very much matters. All right. Let's see what other questions we have. There's a lot more to be said, and there's a whole article here with different definitions and sexual identity and gender identity and gender expression, but I am going to skip ahead. We've already gone an hour, so let's start, and we've got a ton of super chat questions. So let's skip to those. Let me see, first of all, on topic. That's off topic. That's off topic. That's off topic. All right, here's one from Fred Harper. $50. I think masculinity and femininity are package deal concepts, and most people aren't on the same page about what that package deal is. It's hard to define an essential to either. Different sexes can hold traits from either package deal. So I don't think they're package deals. I don't think that femininity has in it both, a package deal is when you put in things that belong and things that negate, things that are like self-interest is a package deal in the way it's dealt in the world today, because it has in that folder both people pursuing rational self-interest, people being productive, and people who are lying, cheating, stealing, SOBs, and they put them together as if it's the same thing, but it's not. One is being self-interested, one is being self-destructive, and actually the opposite of it. So package deal is putting different things into the same package and calling them the same and pretending they're the same and treating them as the same. That's, by the way, the idea that cis women and trans women are both women makes women a package deal of something that is a woman, a cis woman, and something that isn't a woman, a trans woman. So that would be the package deal. But masculinity and femininity certainly don't have to be package deals, and I don't think they are for the most part. Masculinity is particular traits that are associated with maleness, being a male, it doesn't mean that every male is only masculine. These are particular traits that you could have in particular quantities, and it's about strength and physicality and masculinity and so on. And femininity is soft and more sensual, but men can have elements. So a man can have elements of masculinity and femininity. A woman can have elements of masculinity and femininity. So you don't define a man or woman based on their masculinity and femininity. Right? These are these are the attributes, but right. So this is where it's beyond my field. So the exact relationship between masculinity and femininity and a male and a female, man and woman, the exact relationship, how much of that is psychological? I think a lot of it's psychological. How much of the masculine and how much of the feminine? Is there some element of biology there? Do some men have more testosterone than other men, more estrogen than other women? To what extent does that shape our choices these what do you call it, psychological characteristics. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. Anybody knows, but I don't know. But I don't think they're in any sense package deals. I think they're real phenomena that need to be studied, and figured out, and we need clearer definitions of them, right? And Rand, I don't think this is a job for philosophers. That's why I don't think it's a job for the Ayn Rand Institute. It's a job for psychologists. It's a job for psychology. This is primarily an issue for psychology. I mean, the issue of the trans activism, these intellectuals, that's philosophy, because we're dealing with definitions, we're dealing with epistemology, we're dealing with reality, we're dealing with truth. But the issue of what is femininity, what is masculinity, how do they relate, that is all issues of psychology. They're not issues of philosophy, and therefore they're not issues that the Ayn Rand Institute needs to deal with. And there can be legitimate disagreement about these things, and there are, while accepting a particular philosophy. Doesn't mean all those differences of opinions are right. It just means they're differences of opinion, and some are right and some are wrong. Or one is right and many are wrong, more typically. Go figure out which is which. Let's see. Adam says, some Lynn Conway's computer-aided design of very large-scale microchips, etc., the greatest inventor of our century, top years were lost to gender dysphoria. Wouldn't we be better with earlier okay for kids to be trans? I think it's just, how do you know when kids are objective about this? Kids, are very prone to be emotional. They do not have full capacity to reason. They have not fully developed. So, for example, a lot of girls, when they grow up, are tomboys, and they love to hang out with the boys, and and they love to do boys' things and all of that, and many of them complain that they want to be boys. They wish they were born boys. And then puberty happens. And suddenly they become girls, women. They get all the pluses and I guess the aches and pains of being a woman. And suddenly they realize the beauty and power and wonder of being a woman. Of that this biology, this particular biology, gives you. And they abandon their tomboy ways and are quite happy. So if a 10-year-old girl says, I want to be a man, and she hasn't experienced puberty yet, she doesn't know what she wants. And how does she know what she wants? We don't let kids decide anything of importance. Almost nothing in the modern world with helicopter parents. Now we want to let kids decide to take hormones that will prevent them from having puberty, that will change their sex. I mean, that to me is insane. Now, when they're post-puberty, 17, 18, 19, I would like to make it 18, the age of adulthood, the age where they can make decisions for themselves. The frontal cortex doesn't develop until they say until the late teens, early 20s, fully developed. They should be in to make such a big decision. This is a big decision. To make such a big decision, you have to have your full cognitive capabilities to do it. And if they can't sign contracts, you should not be agreeing to change their biology. When they're adults, they can do what they want. I certainly wouldn't do it before the age of 18. If you can't vote, you shouldn't be able to choose what sex you shouldn't be able to choose voluntarily to change your biology. You can't drink beer. Whatever the age of drinking beer is in the United States, that, 21, 18, whatever that is, that should be the age. So, no, I don't think 16-year-olds know what they want. Almost no 16-year-old I know is I would consider an adult, particularly not American 16-year-olds who are unbelievably childish, prone to being influenced by peers in irrational ways. It's very difficult to find a rational 16-year-old. So, yeah. The later the better they make the decision. And yeah, there's a cost to it. Look, dysphoria, gender dysphoria is a real cost. It's really screwed up. And there's a price to pay for it. Right? There's a price to pay for it. There's no shortcuts here. But you can't, I think it's child abuse. I think the state should prevent parents from transitioning children. I think it should be a crime to transition children, certainly before puberty. But again, I think the child needs to consent, and because it needs to consent, it needs to be at the consent age, which means 18. And I don't think this subjectivist nonsense should be taught. The subjectivist part of it. Ashton says this episode might get censored from YouTube for calling out the insanity, the woke side of the LGBTQ. We'll see. We'll see what it means to be censored. I don't, as you know, I don't put ads on my live shows. So it's not like they are going to, not run ads on it, because they don't run ads on it anyway. Will they cancel it? Will they put it aside? We'll see. We'll see what they do with it. That would be pretty sad if they do. But most of my shows where I talk about sex in any way or abortion, they typically won't monetize. This case, I'm not asking to monetize. Maybe Action Jackson will tape a clip and try to monetize that, and they'll stop monetization. Okay. They don't owe me anything, so be it. They'll do what they have to do. John says about Matt's movie, the film is lacking because Matt is not interested in finding the truth. I agree with you. It is legitimate to ask the distinction between men and women and why it matters, as well as asking if man can become a woman by some standard. I agree. I think this is why I hesitated even to show it, because I don't think Matt is the right person to be seeking the truth on this issue, because I don't think he cares about the truth in this issue. I think this is all about his religious agenda. And again, religious agenda around sex is not exactly a healthy agenda. So I disagree with Matt about sex, and I disagree with the people he interviewed about it as well. All right, let's see. That was all the $20 questions on subject. Let me see if the non-$20 questions on subject. Ed says, if the left can say that Bumblebee is a fish, a recent court ruling. I haven't read that court ruling. I've heard about it. I need to read and find out what exactly they said. Why are we surprised that they did not know what a woman is? Epistemology matters. Yeah, epistemology matters. By the way, it's not like the right has a good epistemology. I mean, nobody out there has a good epistemology. And part of the sadness about Matt insisting on the truth is he's not interested in the truth, right? What is the truth? Well, Matt, do you really want to know what the truth is? When God is the standard, you're not interested in the truth, right? So, the epistemology matters, and the right and the left completely ignore reality, truth, and neither one of them have the right epistemology. Very few people have the right epistemology. All right, let's see. Okay. Ed says, I wonder where women who are members of the women's liberation stand on this new look at what woman is. I mean, I've talked about that. I think a lot of the feminists view this as problematic. And that's why people like J.K. Rowling are very opposed to the trans activists because of, not only because they're obnoxious and bad, but because of the way they're trying to redefine what woman means. And these feminists have fought for a particular conception of women. And now these, not only have they fought tradition and everything else about what women should be, and now they're being attacked by the transgender for their perspective on what women is. So the whole thing is a mess for the feminists. And the feminists are very uncomfortable with all this, or at least some feminists are. All right. Fred Harper says, I think this guy might mean that sex isn't a moral choice issue. Then given justice, you treat people off their choices, but their sex besides for finding a partner. Yeah, I mean, the sex you have certainly isn't a moral issue. You could argue that being trans is not a moral issue, that it's not within choice, or it's not within the adult's ability to choose. It's based on choices made when you were a child and not that conscious. Who knows? Again, this is psychology. And in that sense, so I'm not making the issue of trans a moral issue at this point, although you could argue that it is, because it is certainly the intellectuals are, this movement it's moral because it's negating reality. It's purposefully going against reality. It's a negation of biological reality. Again, I'm not condemning particular individuals, because those particular individuals, in a sense, I feel sorry for them, because it's a sad state to be conflicted like that, and there have to be psychological causes for that, for which I have no explanation. Fenn Harper says, I think femininity is the concept that is very hard to define so long as it isn't synonymous with women. I'm not sure that's true. I think you can separate femininity as those characteristics that are most often associated with women, or have been, the women tend towards, and the men don't, and masculinity is that which men tend towards, or that femininity is that which, a fully integrated woman would manifest, versus masculinity is a fully integrated man manifest. But these are all hard concepts, and again, require real study, with regard to real study by researchers and psychologists who specialize in this, who really do the work. Whoops, what did I just say? James G says, it is interesting that this is a debate about nature. In places like Thailand, ladyboys are proud to be that and understand that they are not women. Yeah, I mean, there's a term for them. They're ladyboys, right? And, why they're ladyboys, what is it exactly about the biology, what is exactly going on, how much of it is they're born with it, how much is it that they change in themselves afterwards, all of that. Again, I don't know. Somebody would have to study all that, but there are borderline cases, and we just have to have different categories. They're men, they're women, and then they're people who, for whatever reason, don't associate with their biological sex, but that doesn't make them the opposite sex. It's a separate category, and then there are these categories that you can't define as men or female, and it's not clear how to define them. Maybe ladyboys is a category. James G asked, or says, the Penn trans swimmer is banned from Olympics because of the reality of being stronger than all female swimmers. However, NCAA in America approves. I think it's wrong for the NCAA to approve, and I think it's right for the Olympics Committee to make the choice that they made. All right, start. Have you read or looked at the novel The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. It examines androgyny in a sexless world with ambisexual humans. No, and I'm unlikely to read such a novel. It strikes me as uniquely uninteresting. I mean, androgyny doesn't interest me. A sexless world doesn't interest me. Ambisexual humans don't interest me. All of that doesn't interest me. I find nothing of that of interest to read about. Okay. All right. Cool. Now let's turn to unrelated questions. There were a lot of those. And hopefully I'll know more about the topics with these other questions than I do about sexuality. Not my core topic, but hopefully you found some of this interesting and valuable. All right, let's see. Yeah, let me first start by thanking everybody in the super chat. We're still about 150 short, so that's six $20 7.5 $20 questions, or somebody coming in with 150 or 100 or 50 or whatever. So jump in. Let's get to the 650 next, not break the trend. Catherine is here to help promote the show and get us all excited, and hopefully we can get more support and get up to the 650 or 1,000 or whatever you guys, your generosity leads to. We still got a lot of questions to answer, so you've got plenty of time to decide what you want to ask and how much you want to put on the question, but feel free to engage with it. All right, let's start with friend Harper. He says, off topic, but I recommend looking into Canadian Bill C-11, which is the legislation that is imposing control on advising via streaming services, including YouTube advertising. I'll look into it. I'm not sure what this is. I guess I'm not sure what the question is or what the comment is. That Doodle Bunny for $100. Can you review the song Wellerman? Oh, let me open up my my page with the songs that I'm supposed to review. All right. There is a music video, an extremely uplifting and benevolent song that will get in your head. All right, I'll review it. Somebody said I didn't review the words to Al Yankovic's song. Because they're silly. It's a silly song. It's meant to be silly. It's about horoscopes, making fun of horoscopes. There's nothing much to dig in there. All right, Ashton asks, Yuan, if you ever get a chance in your life, you should visit Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. I know you hate war memorials for justified reasons, but seeing that sacred ground where so many men lost their lives trying to end slavery is truly breathtaking. Yeah, I can imagine, and I'm not against war memorials. I find them very, if it's a just war, I find it very touching and very emotional. As somebody who's been in the military, who's been in a war, I know something about it, not as much as some people who've been, more in action than I have. But I know something about what goes into being in a war, and it's a big deal. And dying in a war and fighting for justice, fighting for what is right, is a big deal. I have a huge amount of respect for people who fight. And I find memorials for heroes very touching and very moving. So yeah, I would go to Gettysburg and hopefully will one day. Michael asks, it seems like Kant didn't believe his own philosophy. He saw the implications of Enlightenment ideas that were making men independent and happy, and his inferiority complex kicked in, so he needed to find a way to shut it down. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of what you just said. Did Kant believe in his own philosophy? Yeah, I think he did. I think to a large extent he wrote the philosophy to kind of justify what his inclinations, and he wrote a philosophy that would kind of justify them all. I mean, if you ever talk about sex, if you ever read what Kant had to say about masturbation, oh my God. It was almost worse than murder to masturbate. I mean, he has horrible things to say about masturbation. It really gives you some psychological insight into this guy. But he built a philosophy. I don't know the extent to which he believed in it or not. I think, as Ayn Rand or Leonard Peikoff said, he probably had to evade in order to hold it. So it's a philosophy built on a massive evasion. But Wanda Freeman says Kant had no life experience. That's true. I mean, he lived in the same town. He never left it, never in his life, left this town in which he was born, studied, did everything. But I have, I have no way to psychologize about Kant. Jacob writes, government intervention means perverse incentives. Vaccine manufacturers immune from liability since the late 80s. Since then, $4 billion paid to government to vaccine injury, invite Vinay Prasad, re-corruption, re-COVID vax for kids. Look, I'm not a fan of vaccinating kids for COVID. I just don't get it. It seems bizarre to me that you would vaccinate kids for COVID. Kids are very unsusceptible to COVID. It doesn't do them much harm. It just seems nutty. There are certain issues with vaccines, and young people seem to be more, particularly young men, seem to be more susceptible to those issues with vaccines than older people and women. I don't buy certainly government intervention creates perverse incentives, no question. I don't buy the idea that drug companies are corrupt and are fundamentally corrupt because of government intervention. Yes, government intervention, perverts where they invest their money. Government intervention perverts which drugs they develop and which they don't. Government intervention perverts the kind of research that is done, all of that. But the idea that because these companies were paid billions of dollars to produce a vaccine, which would have happened even without government intervention, that is, insurance companies would have bought all the vaccines they could have produced in a laissez-faire world. I don't believe that caused them to produce an unsafe vaccine, that they lobbied and forced down our throats an unsafe vaccine. I don't understand this childhood thing. I really don't think it's primarily the drug companies, although they are pushing this. I don't think it's primarily them. I think it's primarily the insane way in which many people have taken COVID. You're seeing it with the Chinese government. So this is not, and this whole Chinese response to COVID kind of disproves the idea that China released this on the West purposefully to do this to us all, because it's hurting them in such a horrible way. It's increasing poverty. It's destroying their productive ability. It's causing supply chains for them to be destroyed. It's creating social unrest. It's doing everything the opposite of what the Communist Party would like. So this is a dramatic, horrific event for the Chinese for the Chinese Communist Party, and of course for China. But I think that there are people out there who are so obsessed and so fanatical now about COVID. These are the people who are still wearing masks, who wear masks outdoors while they're jogging in the park with nobody around them. It's become like a religion, and I think those people are the ones pushing vaccines on kids more than anything else. Many of them are parents who are terrified. These are the helicopter parents who won't let their kids do anything, and now they want to stuff them with drugs. They already stuffed them with drugs to prevent them from being so-called hyperactive. I think this is much more the fault of parents than it is the fault of pharmaceutical companies. But while I think that government intervention creates perverse incentives, most of those perverse incentives have to do with allocation of capital than they do with putting out a product that is unsafe and pushing it. I don't think that's the case here. I don't think that's the case, and I don't think there's any empirical evidence to suggest that's the case. Yeah, but immunity from liability is absurd and ridiculous. But of course, lots of industries have immunity from liability. Now, the Supreme Court just ruled that cops, conservative Supreme Court has just ruled basically that cops are immune from liability. You know, they don't read you your Miranda rights, you can't sue them. Even if you're found not guilty in court, you can't sue them. There was another case, which I need to read up about last week also, that basically granted unlimited immunity from liability to federal police agencies. Yeah, I mean, the immunity for liability is really, really bad. Of course, when the government controls the healthcare system and forces pharmaceutical companies, forces doctors, forces medical institutions to practice medicine, to produce certain drugs in particular ways, then you still have these companies have liability. I mean, government intervention creates distortions, and they try to cover those distortions by giving these immunities, which then creates more distortions and even greater distortions. Harper Campbell, uncertainty equals anxiety. If you hold values of the, this is gender anxiety. Okay, I should have had this before, sorry. If you hold values of the gender concept related to the opposite sex, they will be uncertain of how they should act given social pressures. A life of anxiety follows naturally in the culture. I mean, I think that generally no friend Harper, I don't know what that means. Generally, we live in a culture that promotes mental sickness, promotes anxiety, promotes, and that has to do with faulty epistemology and a lack of confidence in reason and an elevation of emotion above anything else. And people emote all kinds of psychologically difficult and contradictory things, and we elevate that and we promote that. Oh, he said Harper Collins. Yes, it's a friend Harper. We got two Harpers, and I need to get them straight. Sorry, friend Harper. This is friend Harper, this question. So yes, I think absolutely a lot of the sexual confusion that exists in the world out there, and there's a lot of it, and a lot of depression around sex, a lot of the social problems around sex, mental problems around sex, derive from the elevation of emotion above reason, the inability of people to think, the inability of people to actually connect with their emotions, understand those emotions, and actually deal with emotions. They either take emotions as given, as metaphysical, as the standard, or they repress their emotions. Often it's both, and they don't want to feel them, they deny them, they reject them, which creates confusion, which creates uncertainty, which creates anxiety. So yes, much of modern society is anxiety creating, anxiety enhancing. I think Leonard Peikoff's got a talk on this, and that can bring about schizophrenia, and a lot of the mental diseases that we see could very well be consequences of just bad epistemology drilled into people, and bad psychoepistemology and bad epistemology. And an inability to deal with emotions, or irrational way of dealing with emotions. Whoops. Fen Harper says, thanks for answering. I ask this line of questions because I think this is the essential that the culture is arguing over. I value your input greatly. Thank you for the opportunity to pick your brain. My pleasure. I hope I answered the question. I hope that was of value. Okay, Richard. Have you seen Jonathan Haidt's The Rationalist Delusion in Moral Psychology? If so, what do you think of it? I have not seen it. I think his social media article made some good points. Social media has weaponized the need for belonging, in my opinion. So I'm going to do a whole show on his article about social media because I think it's important. I think it's interesting. So we'll be doing a show on that soon because it's fresh on my mind. I just read the article and I just had the opportunity to hear him speak about it. So it will be something we'll be talking about soon. So maybe we can talk about it then, but I have not seen that particular talk. I'll look for it. So I don't want to talk about too much about social media now. We'll talk about it when we get to, when we do the show on that. Whoops. All right. Thanks, Richard. All right, we have a bunch of these questions. We're $105 short. Let's not get $105 between us and meeting our goal. Let's make sure we meet the goal. So 5 $20 questions, basically do it. I'm sure there are 5 people out there can afford to do a $20 questions and have a question to ask me. So feel free to do that. Or somebody can just step in with $105 and allow us to end this. In the meantime, I've got a bunch of $5 and $10 questions that we're going to do. All right, let's start with Liam. Liam has, are we still in stage 1 of the objectivist movement? What would classify as stage 2? So stage 1 is ignorance of. Stage 2 would be denial, and stage 3 is acceptance. So it depends on what you mean by stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. But I think it's still early, put it that way. I think the culture has absorbed a lot of objectivism. The culture has absorbed a lot of Ayn Rand. A lot of good things about objectivism are, well, everything's about objectivism is good, but a lot of fragments of objectivism, if you will, although objectivism is a system, but elements of objectivism have been integrated somewhat into the culture and into thinking. The full system has not been, the full integration has not. There are pieces of it out there, pieces of reason and rationality, where Ayn Rand has really had an impact, but there's still a lot of work to do. We're still very early. There's still just not enough objectivists, and primarily there's just not enough objectivist intellectuals. It's much more prevalent now than it was in any time in history. There's a lot more activity, there's a lot more content, there's a lot more things going on, there are a lot more people involved. It's not even on the same ballpark as the 1960s, where it was Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden. Now, granted, they were giants, particularly Ayn Rand, and there's no giants of their scope anymore. And then there was Leonard Peikoff, another giant, and there's no giant like Leonard Peikoff anymore. But then there were a lot of mini giants, a lot of really, really good people, many more now than there were back then. People, the intellectuals today, put aside Rand, Branden, Leonard, and maybe some of the Harry and some others. I think the intellectuals today who are objectivists are much more knowledgeable about objectivism. But yeah, I think it's much bigger than it was. Much more substantial, much more influential than it was. All that work that Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff and to some extent Nathaniel Branden did in the 1960s and 70s influenced the culture, changed the culture already, and it's going to change the culture even more in the future. It was never on national television back then. It was almost never on national television. And to the extent that it was Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand's, of course, not around. And it was, but I've been on television, if I can say so. I've been on television more than Ayn Rand was. Not as good, obviously, not as influential, obviously, but have been. It's not an issue. But Ayn Rand now often appears in different TV series, whether it was Mad Men or Dirty Dancing. One of her books appeared. Their characters, the shows that. What was it, the animated show that Pixar did that was clearly influenced by ideas from Ayn Rand. Even the director said so. Didn't necessarily do a good job of it, but heavily influenced. Rand was in Johnny Carson, 3 times. It's amazing. And she was on other big shows, but all right. Television was very different back then. You had long shows where people talked. There are no shows like that anymore. And in terms of shows that number of people watch, look at some of the places that objectivists have been interviewed. Look at the influence Alex Epstein is having. Look at the number of places he's been. people he's talked to, shows he's been on. It truly is amazing how much reach objectivism is having today. I think much more reach than it had in the 1960s. And Ayn Rand's books are selling more today than they sold in the 1960s. They are. So, yeah, I don't agree. I do not agree. So I don't know what stage we are. It depends on how you define the stages. Flirtatious. Thank you for being the best take machine on the internet. Best take machine on the internet. I don't know what that means. Do you think this is a mental health issue of gender dysphoria? Also, I will donate just as hard after the house tour. Thanks for making my commute from Seattle. I think it's probably a mental health issue. Dysmorphia, I mean, there could be biological causes. That is, there could be hormone issues. There could be other things going on. But I do think there's probably a mental health issue going on. Again, not necessarily a mental health issue that can be treated, particularly today. But yeah, I think that if the day will come, we'll understand this better. Again, how much biology, because of the important role hormones play in feeling, energy, a lot of things that interacts with the psychology. Hormone imbalances relating to male, female could affect, I don't know, right? I don't. But mental health clearly could be and should be looked at as a main cause. Oh yeah, Hopper Campbell. This time it's Hopper Campbell, not Friend Campbell. Hopper Campbell says, was Pinochet the only dictator in history to implement free market reform? Does Milton Friedman get credit for this? No, he was not. I mean, it depends what you mean by free market reform. So, relative movement towards free markets? No, he was not. I mean, Singapore is a dictatorship. And it went much further in terms of free market reforms and generally freedom reforms under a dictator. China went through some pretty significant free market reforms, movement towards a free market, not the establishment of a free market, because there was no establishment of a free market in Chile, but movement towards that. That happened in China. Trying to think other places, but those are the examples I can think of right now. I think most of the free market reforms that happened in South Korea maybe started under dictatorship, but then were accelerated under democratic elected government. Taiwan maybe started under dictatorship and accelerated under a free government. So no, he's certainly not the only one. Let's see. Cassie asks for $20. We're slowly chipping away. Still $70 remaining. Cassie asks, as someone who wants to write about politics from an objectivist perspective, what are a couple of the most pertinent topics to research and cover, in your opinion? Oh, God. I mean, anything, right? Because there's so much, right? I think basically how government intervention in the economy distorts and makes us poorer and distorts the world. I think it's the damage that the mixed economy does to us. The fact that both left and right, and here I think it's more interesting to write about the right, have turned against markets and are anti-capitalist and anti-markets and anti-freedom in a fundamental sense. So, basically researching the trend on the right that is anti-freedom, I think is very interesting and important right now. So there's no end. There's no end to the topics. I don't have anything that's urgent that jumps out at me. I think you could start anywhere, and if you're starting out, then anything you research something that interests you and that's easy, simple, relatively simple. You'll discover it's more complicated as you go along, but relatively simple. And then go to the more complicated issues over time. Practice, practice, practice. Like anything. You need a practice to become good at something. To write about politics is hard, really, really hard. Start with something simple and then move to the more complicated. Hopper Campbell. Why did Atlas Shrugged in Germany the way it did? Why didn't Atlas Shrugged in Germany the way it did in the Soviet Union have status discovered allowing the illusion of private property makes their evil last longer? Yeah, I think that's right. That's also the experience now in China. But did it last longer, right? I mean, the problem with anything with regard to Germany is Germany lasted 12 years, right? Hitler came to power in 1933, if I remember right, and was dead by 45. One of the reasons Hitler is a failure by any measure, his regime lasted 12 years and he's out. He's dead. He's finished. So some of it lasted 12 years. Some of it lasted less because some of the scientists didn't work for him. They escaped. They left. There's a huge shrug in 1930s Germany. A lot of the most talented Jews and non-Jews, the most talented scientists, engineers, mathematicians, even some businessmen left Germany in the 1930s. Hitler was everything about Hitler, everything about Nazism was a massive failure. And of course Hitler wouldn't say he was a successful man. He committed suicide. If there's ever a sign of failure, it's when you shoot yourself in the head or you take poison or whatever it is, right? That's a sign of failure. Hitler was a massive failure. He lost the war. He destroyed Germany. Even by the standard of the, quote, Aryan people, he killed more Aryan people than anybody. So by any standard, any objective standard, but any standard, he's a loser. He's a loser. And so I'm not sure that, what were we talking about? I'm not sure it's right to say that Atlas didn't shrug in Germany. It did. It did. It shrugged in the 30s, and then it would have shrugged even more as time went on. You know, some of his generals tried to kill him. You know, what was we talked about the general last time who fought on the African front and then in France and was considered his most brilliant general, turned against him, tried to kill him, and then, you know, was not available to him when, when Germany needed to defend itself. In a sense, he shrugged, maybe late. Certainly, he gets moral blame for shrugging so late. Richard asks, what are YB's thoughts on marking special occasions such as anniversaries or first dates? Yeah, great, absolutely, wonderful. You want to celebrate important things in your life? You want to celebrate life? Wow, you guys remember first dates? I don't remember the date of my first date with my wife, but I certainly celebrate my wedding anniversary, celebrate birthdays. Have reasons to celebrate, and celebrate a great relationship, celebrate success in a relationship, celebrate love. I'm all for it. I think it's wonderful. Okay, Richard, what are your thoughts of dating in the workplace? I find the idea to be one that makes both logistic sense and likely working together with shared goals over long periods of time makes such relationships seem likely, but possibly high risk. I think it's wonderful to date in the workplace. I think, It's one of those places where you interact with people around shared values. You see their competencies. You see how they perform. You get to know them under situations of stress. Yeah, I mean, I think it should be one of the main places in which I think that this whole rejection and almost a criminalization of dating in the workplace is massively destructive to dating, to the ability to find somebody that one can love and have a great relationship with. So, you know, I met my wife in the army during a war, working on identifying targets. It was stressful. It was intense. It was long hours. It was amazing, right? But that was great. Now, yes, I can see the difficulties, the challenges if you break up and what happens and you're still working together. Suddenly, I can see the challenges if it's a relationship between a boss and a subordinate. But again, I think if you do it right, and you think about it and you do it in a thoughtful way, I find it ridiculous to outlaw that or to ban that or to say it can never happen. I mean, you have to be careful because of the power relationship, to use a kind of a leftist term. Richard, happy to catch another YB show, if only at the end. Unfortunately, my work schedule has been hectic this week. Thank you for everything you do, Johan. Thank you, Richard. And Richard, you pulled us over the 650 mark, and Emmanuel has pulled us over the $700 mark. So thank you again for us reaching our targets. So Emmanuel says, if you were to move to one city in the United States right now, where would you go? I don't know. I really don't know. It's tough. It's tough. I love Austin, Texas, but I'm becoming more and more worried about Texas. One of the things I like about Austin is it's not wacky Republican Texas, but if you followed at all the Texas Republican Convention, God, they're nuts. These people are nuts. So I worry about Texas. They're now talking about seceding. I worry about what Texas would look like as an independent state. But Austin is a beautiful city, but it's too hot and humid in the summer. It's just too hot and humid. And it's actually too cold in the winter for me. Florida, I find just boring. It's flat. You know, Miami could be interesting if I lived on the ocean in a condo, but that's super expensive. And it's a big city. It's kind of an intimidating city in terms of traffic and everything. I don't know. Again, Florida's hot and humid, really hot and humid summers. I mean, I really do love California. God, I wish I could move back to California. But how do you go to California? You know, Nashville is beautiful, no state taxes. You go to this place, house. You know, I don't know what the people are like. They're good people there, obviously, but would I like living in Nashville? I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of country music. I don't know where I would move. You know, Seattle is amazing, but it rains all the time. I would only want to live in Seattle in the summer. 2 months in the summer. That's it for Seattle. Yeah, I don't know where I would move to. You know, North Carolina. There's advantages in North Carolina. The Virginia's very nice. I don't like the weather in either of those places. I mean, I really, you know, I'd love to live in. I like Scottsdale. I like Phoenix, Scottsdale area. It's beautiful. I like the desert, but it's too damn hot in the summer. It's unbearable in the summer. Utah, too Mormon. I couldn't live with all those Mormons around me. It just would be weird. It's a beautiful country. Wyoming's too cold. Montana's too cold. So weather plays a big role in it, and weather. there's only one state that fits my desires in terms of weather, and that's California. And I have to admit that, I don't know. I think in the end, I'd probably go live in Austin, Texas, and leave for 5 months during the summertime. Go somewhere else, right? But, as I become older and I can live anywhere, weather, taxes, things like that become more important to me. But the big advantage of Austin right now, and this is a big one, is that they have the most amazing objectivist community. It's just stunning how many people have moved there. More people are moving all the time. Some of the best people I know within the objectivist movement live in Austin. It's a vibrant objectivist community. It's not even one. It's not even one community. There are multiple communities within there. There are different people. That I think would sway it for me. So I would move to Austin because of that, because of the objectivist community there, and the number of objectivist intellectuals and just interesting objectivist people who live in Austin. It would be so much fun to be hanging out with them all the time. Richard, great drama called Startup, portrays the possibilities of romance in the workplace and very positive portrayal of entrepreneurs and investors. Happily recommend. I think you would enjoy it. This is a Korean show, K-drama. Yes. All right. I will look. I think it's on my list because I think I've noticed it and noticed that it looks interesting. Thank you, Richard. And one more from Richard. Richard says, I love California and New York in spite of the cost of living and taxes. People are hardworking and driven. My coworkers are not leftist but liberal. However, living with family is a privilege of being 25, a student. Not sure what the last sentence means, but yeah, I love California and New York for the same reason. But at some point, the taxes just get to you. The irrationality of the government there gets to you. Like the homelessness in San Francisco gets to you. I would have loved to have lived in New York when I was younger. New York seems like such an exciting, fun place to live. In being a foodie and and being loving of classical music. I mean, New York is the one place where there's always something to do, something to see, somewhere to go to eat. It's just amazing. Same with London. I love London for that reason. And I could see myself living in London. But again, in both places, the weather's not ideal for me. California, the weather's ideal. So yeah, I lived in California for, how long did I live in California? From 93 to 2017. So that's a long time. I lived in California for 24 years, and I don't regret that at all. Loved it. Loved it. And if not for the taxes, I wouldn't have left. All right, wow. All right, no more questions. I need to get to bed. It's already 10 o'clock. I need to get, after these shows, I have to get rid of the high. What do you call it when you, so I can go to sleep, because otherwise my brain is racing and I can't get to sleep. So I won't go to sleep. If I go now, I won't go to sleep until probably midnight. So that's why, we need to end soon. All right. Is there any reason in reality-oriented thinking still out there? Yes, absolutely. A lot of it. And, all we focus on, all the news focuses on, all Twitter focuses you on, is on this. But there's still science, there's engineering, there's technology, there's business. There's still some good intellectuals out there. There's still some fascinating Substacks that I read. There's still some interesting people. Like this female philosopher that Ben and Anka were talking about, who seems to be super reason and reality oriented when it comes to these trans issues. You might not agree with everything she says, but she's super focused on reality and reason in a healthy, positive way. So there's, and a good epistemology, according to them. I haven't read the book. But yeah, there's a lot of goodness out there. My talk my talk is going to be at Ocon on why I'm still optimistic. So don't give up on reason and reality. Don't give up on humanity and people. Michael asks, do you prefer living in a condo or private home? Now, at this point in my life, condo. I like a condo. It's perfect. When you have a family, house, absolutely. When I have kids and running around in a pool and whatever, definitely a house. But for my lifestyle, for what I want, for the kind of life I live, my condo is perfect. Really is perfect. It's big. It has all the amenities I need, and it's comfortable and it's easy to maintain. And you don't have the maintenance issues that you have with a house. Landon, I believe social media has just exposed bad opinions most people already had. Maybe the pendulum will swing the other way, being sick of casual views. I think you're right. Social media highlights, but it does create. I think it does have an impact on how we relate to other people. So I think it's the impact it has is deeper than just amplification. I think it's more than amplification. But again, let's talk about that when we talk about social media. Ashton Milky Way says, did you see that smoking jewels are now banned in U.S. market? Classic government telling us what we can and cannot trade. I'm not sure what smoking jewels are, but yes, I get the point. None of their business. They should stay out of it. Fend Harper, I mean values like provider or alpha or macho. Yeah. This goes back to a previous conversation. Yes, certain of those values are subjective and not objective values that properly relate to male, to what it means to be masculine. Whoops, I didn't mean to press that. James G. asked, the movie What is a Woman is interesting that it became a bestseller. Why do things that are obvious sell many copies? What stops mankind from really focusing on the future and the possibilities? Yeah, I mean, the reason it's so popular is because the right relishes the opportunity to make fun of the left. And making fun of the left sells. Making fun of the left sells. If I just dedicated my show to making fun of the left, I'd have a lot more subscribers and make a lot more money than I do. That's the reason. Okay, Steven says, thoughts on drag shows. Drag is comedy entertainment. My girlfriend likes RuPaul's Drag Race TV show, but I'm almost too baffled by it to enjoy. Yeah, I mean, I don't get it, but I know people who find it entertaining, but I don't get it. It can be funny, but again, mostly I find it sad. Why do these people feel the need to dress as something that they're not? Does dress really matter? I mean, anyway, it's, yeah, I've never really, I generally don't find it entertaining, but I don't find it offensive either. Should Ayn Rand, this is Father Nick, should Ayn Rand have gotten a Nobel Peace Prize? No, getting a Nobel Peace Prize is an insult. So the best thing about Nobel Prizes for peace, they should be eliminated. They really should be eliminated because the people who've gotten them are so awful that it's lost all value and all credibility. Santa Barbara, this is Richard again, is the best weather I've ever experienced though. I agree. Southern California, can't beat it. It's amazing and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful country and there's so much to do and yeah, it's hard to beat Santa Barbara. Juul is a type of vape. I was guessing that. Thanks for confirming that. All right, $776 raised. Thank you guys. This is great. I will be on Saturday and on Sunday with some new topics. And I will see you all then. I am going to go relax a little bit and then try and get some sleep. I think the sticker payments get through. The question is in your show's email. Okay, I'll have to do that question next time. Not sure why the question didn't go through, and I got the stickers. Really appreciate them. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you all on Saturday. Have a great night. Thank you again to all the super chatters for supporting the show. Really, 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 really appreciate the support. Bye, everybody.